among the crowd, an Amazonian woman darts back and forth through the thronging crowd of her fellows, wailing that these strangers were seizing their queen and intended to spirit her away. Passionate to whether one specific moment or another caused the decline of classical civilization, but one of the possible progress. But who was the son of Marcus Aurelius, and what cemented his reputation throughout the millennia as among the darkest rulers of the Roman Empire, together with such figures as Caligula and Nero? Welcome to our video on Commodus and the end of the Roman Golden Age. We're happy to present the sponsor of this video, World Anvil. As voracious readers, RPG enthusiasts, and hopefuls to write and publish a novel down the line, we're happy to receive the support of World Anvil. World Anvil is the award-winning ultimate world-building toolset and RPG campaign manager made for game masters, writers, role players, and other creatives interested in designing their own universe. It allows users to build a living world for your incredible novels, games, and art using their inspirational toolset. World Anvil gives creative people a tool to collaborate, showcase, and monetize their world, and the universes forged in World Anvil are completely secure. Each account is backed up every day to multiple servers, so you will never lose your progress. The feature that we like the most is the interactive maps. You can bring in your custom map to the platform and make it interactive, linking path to writing your best-selling novel or running a perfect homebrew campaign. So, what are you waiting for? Support our channel and your hobby by clicking the link in the description and using our code KNG to get 25% off all 12-month memberships. Following the death of Emperor Marcus Aurelius in March of 180, his son Commodus inherited the throne at the age of 18. Senatorial sources have popularized the idea that the young emperor immediately went home to indulge in pleasure and vice. But the truth is he continued campaigning against the Germanic Buri for half a year until they were defeated, and only then returned to Rome victorious. This was just one of the many events during Commodus's reign, which have certainly been warped by contemptuous Sextus Salterus and Cleander. The emperor also abandoned Marcus Aurelius's ambitious plans to establish provinces within the conquered lands of Germania. Although this was actually in tune with Augustus's no overexpansion doctrine, our sources put us from 180 to 182 was actually in line with his father's, but the new ruler was unwilling to show the Senate the same reverence his late father did. This conflict between aristocracy and emperor was only to worsen, triggered by an event 2 years into Commodus's tenure. Without his mother, Faustina, to keep the imperial household in check, Commodus's high-born relatives quickly spiraled out of control. Most prominent among them was the imperator's firebrand sister, Lucilla. She was the widow of Lucius Verus and had been accustomed to wielding the influence of an empress. Becoming a mere princess, as well as Commodus's refusal to annul her second marriage, embittered her. That, alongside the emperor's patronage of freedmen such as Salterus and his sidelining of senatorial candidates, irritated the aristocracy. So the angry Senate and the influential sister plotted together to assassinate Commodus. During one dark afternoon in the winter of 182 AD, the emperor was entering one of his favorite places in all of Rome, the amphitheater. Here a young senatorial man, Claudius Pompeianus Quintianus, was waiting for him in the shadows. The cloaked Quintianus jumped out, but rather than immediately striking, he shouted, "See, this is what the Senate has sent you." This delay allowed Commodus to escape, and his guard the opportunity to arrest the would-be killer. Lucilla's part in it all was uncovered, and the princess was exiled to Capri, where she was later executed. Quintianus was ruthlessly tortured and killed, along with many, many other senators. From that point forward, natural reaction to this attempted assassination, Commodus recoiled from public life to a certain extent. Although the emperor more and more control of government to a trusted, talented, and man. Although this isn't explicitly stated in our sources, It might be speculated that the young emperor used his newfound free time to further indulge in a practice for which he would become infamous: gladiatorial combat. While Perennis saw to the this was not to last. A highly competent figure, Perennis was cursed with bad luck and jealous rivals. Largely unrelated to his own actions, revolts erupted in Britain, Germania, Gaul, and Spain against his prefect. Not only did he desire the prefect's status as the emperor's right hand, but he also hated Perennis personally, taking glee in spreading vicious rumors to undermine him. On one strange occasion during a festival, Commodus was approached by a court himself. Embattled by constant failure, the emperor finally lost trust in Perennis. After supposed evidence emerged that the prefect was plotting revolt, he and his sons were summarily executed, and Cleander replaced Perennis as Commodus's right hand in 185. The emperor's new favorite were immediately desperate for funds with which to fuel the state apparatus, pay revenues from whatever source they could, and the hostile sources we have access to again portray this as corruption. But that is almost definitely a perspective gleaned from resentment. They detail how a degenerate Commodus and his shadow behind the throne, Cleander, squandered the empire's once plentiful treasury on trivialities such as banquets, games, and races. Whether or not the emperor did do this, it is worth keeping in mind that Commodus also served to disprove the accusations were the great baths of Commodus, a lavish temple to Marcus Aurelius and Faustina, as well as the Lamian Gardens. Also despised by the aristocracy were the methods by which the emperor was extracting the money from them. It is often assumed that such crimes were invented, but we can't be sure of that. Cleander also sold positions, promotions, minor governorships and commands, enrollments, and more. Rome was a world utterly removed from our own. The Roman patron, in this case the imperial throne, would grant beneficia to its clients by bestowing lucrative positions and ranks, who would repay the favor with generous monetary compensation down the line. A bought position and incompetence were not always mutually exclusive in the Roman Empire. Otherwise, these stations would almost definitely have been granted based on senatorial and aristocratic patronages. Most of the actions taken by Cleander and Commodus to raise funds were normal practices, twisted and warped by hostile historians into almost demonic acts. Nevertheless, Cleander's reign as de facto grand quotation from Africa was purposefully exacerbated by an administrator who wanted to topple the freedman. It worked like a charm. Soon a violent mob descended on the emperor's palace, forcing Commodus to execute his favorite. Shaken by this, Commodus changed how he was running the empire. Herodians described what the Senate thought of it all. After undergoing such risks, the emperor did no one. He killed now without warning. Listening to hearing. He no longer had any regard for the good life. Night and day, without interruption, licentious pleasures of the flesh made him a slave, body and soul. Although it could be argued that Commodus's reputation was unjustly sundered by venomous senatorial critique, it is from 190 to 192 that his actions crossed the line from slightly unorthodox to possibly insane. Due to what our sources attribute to rampant paranoia, Commodus further intensified his martial training, moving to a new palace which was far prodigious strength, weapon skill, and physical fitness. To top it off, the emperor could even shoot a bow with brilliant accuracy. And though Commodus's enemies must have seen this as yet another mark on the tally of insanity, it was really just prudent. Commodus was getting ready to defend himself. A subtle change in Roman currency between 186 and 191 also gives us evidence of yet standard representations of Hercules where engraved such phrases as Hercule Commodiano. Also shows the crowned sun god Sol with a beard much like the one Commodus had. Well, during this period, the freshly rebranded God Emperor completely removed the distrusted senators and aristocrats from Rome's power structure. relying almost completely on members of his imperial from the Senate's traditional consent, instead relying on the military and the people. The emperor forced the Senate to vote his reign to be dubbed as the Golden Age in official records. To mark the start of this new age of deific imperial rule, he changed his name to the grandiose Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus Augustus Pius Felix. Lashing out against those whom he believed narcissistic move, Commodus had Rome's name changed to Commodiana, while the rebel were duly renamed Commodia, thereafter redubbed Hercules. Whether all of these strange-sounding actions were the consequence of an increasing megalomania, or a legitimate attempt to consciously reinvent the stagnating Roman state, is still a matter of debate among historians. In any case, this utterly infuriated the emperor's enemies. The crescendo of Commodus's reign came during the Ludi Plebeii, or Plebeian Games, of 192. Word of the upcoming spectacle was spread throughout the empire by heralds, and Romans flocked to the splendor of their imperial capital in order to attend the festivities, included gladiatorial combats and chariot races. To begin the games, Rome's divine emperor appeared in the garb of Hercules Venator, the hunter. Moving throughout the arena with considerable skill, Commodus used both spear and bow to kill an elephant and tiger, followed by deer and gazelles, supposedly requiring only a single shot or strike each. After a short intermission and he drenched various enemies, all of which he supposedly triumphed in. It may not be a surprise to hear that, once again, our sources accuse the emperor of having his victories guaranteed in advance. However, everything that can be squeezed from our sources about a competent fighter. Each time the emperor vanquished a foe, both Eclectus, his new chamberlain, and later the Praetorian prefect, his two most favored subordinates, as the crowd cheered in high spirits. Nevertheless, in ancient Rome, especially when bestowed by a man viewed as something removed from the status of a god. In contrast, the assembled senators were coerced into uniformly chanting their support. "You are Lord and you are first, of all men most fortunate. A victor you are, everlasting Amazonian, you are a victor." Commodus's message was blindingly clear. The Senate was to be nothing more than a servile rubber stamp, an outdated relic there to fawn at his feet and little else. He and his circle would rule the state. Cassius Dio describes a moment during the games where the emperor beheaded an ostrich, took a hold of its head, and ascended to where the senators were assembled. Holding the head in his left hand and in his right hand raising aloft his bloody sword, and though he spoke not a word, yet he wagged his head with a grin, indicating that he would treat us in the same way. It seemed that Commodus was in full control. Pasatus, Latus had become more and more irritated with the emperor's increasing independence and rule on behalf of. Latus began to plot and scheme against Commodus. The trusted chamberlain Eclectus also had good reason to get in on the act. Prior to this point, he had been engaged in a covert and salacious affair with Marcia, a woman whom, despite performing only a peripheral role in our story, was loved almost without reservation by Commodus. She was his influential mistress, but would have been his wife and empress had her status in society been higher, which made her resentful. Lowborn, a shrewd politician, Pertinax, who occupied the position of urban prefect. It is highly likely that when the plotters offered without having to shed blood himself, he accepted gladly, despite being the man tasked by Marcus Aurelius with the protection of his son. The day of other distractions. Moreover, almost all senators who remained at Commodus's side would be preparing for the New Year's changeover of magistracies. That evening, during dinner, Marcia covertly spiced the emperor's food with a vicious poison. At her signal, her lover Eclectus used his unquestioned authority as chamberlain to dismiss the palace servants. As planned, the emperor became violently ill due to the toxin and seemed to be in the process of dying, but it wouldn't be that easy. Commodus was in good health, and vomiting purged much of the substance from his body. Still afflicted by Marcia's farewell gift, Commodus stumbled to the Vectilian villa's lavish bathhouse, where he continued to throw up. More concerningly for the conspirators, he started recovering. In a panic, Marcia and Eclectus found Commodus's wrestling partner, another freedman known as Narcissus. After being plied with splendorous bribes and promises, Narcissus entered the bathhouse and wrapped his hands around the emperor's throat. In any other situation, Commodus would have been able to resist, but weakened as he was by his mistress's poison, he was too feeble to push Narcissus. Such was the end of Commodus, states Cassius Dio. After he had ruled 12 years, 9 months, and 14 days, he had lived 31 years and 4 months, and with him, the genuine Aurelii ceased to rule. After this, there occurred most violent wars and civil strife. Commodus's end saw the end of the Roman age of plenty that had held since Augustus. The subsequent catastrophic year of 5 emperors concluded in the rise of the militaristic Severan dynasty, began in earnest. We will talk more about Roman history in our future videos, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one. The Gauls were one of Rome's oldest and most bitter enemies. They had sacked Rome and throughout the centuries fought alongside the Republic's most dangerous adversaries, including Pyrrhus and Hannibal. By the end of the 2nd century BC, southern Gaul was largely subdued. However, there was still tension in northern Gaul, particularly along the Rhine. These tensions would ultimately climax in the Gallic War. We often use the word decisive battle to denote the engagement that brought the end of a conflict or quickened it, but some battles transcend that as they change the fates of entire empires or civilizations. In 48 BC, the great Pompey maneuvering around Greece, the battle with the whole Roman world in balance. Shout out to Magellan TV. We've been enjoying our Magellan TV subscription and hope that our viewers love it too. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service run by filmmakers that has over 3,000 documentaries, among them hundreds of historical documentaries. We're excited to enable you want to give the gift of knowledge. Go to our link in the description, press our banner, and take advantage of this limited month of Magellan TV for free. And share it with your friends and family. We recommend Hidden History of Rome and Meet the Romans, as both of these titles provide so much fun knowledge of Roman history. You can watch both anytime, anywhere on your television, laptop, or mobile device, and it's compatible with most devices. The best part is Magellan TV is offering a 1-month free membership trial to our viewers. If you haven't signed up to Magellan yet, support our channel and do that at try.magellantv.com/kingsandgenerals. You'll get a free 1-month membership trial. Following the defeat at Dyrrhachium, Caesar was in a precarious position. The army under his command was by now heavily depleted, and his other legions were scattered around Greece, 2 under Domitius Calvinus around Macedonia, and 1 in southern Greece under Longinus and Sabinus. Caesar's defeat also meant that his supporters would be wavering. He needed a victory soon, and it would need to be decisive. Caesar's priority was to get his army back into fighting condition, so he first marched to Apollonia, where he left his wounded, and sent 7 cohorts to garrison various towns and cities under his control. Longinus's legion would be safe in southern Greece, but Domitius and his 2 veteran legions of Gallic campaigns, who had been stalling and pinning, now revolved around merging his depleted army with Domitius. If Pompey marched on Italy through Illyria to attack Pompey from the rear, If Pompey marched on Caesar, Caesar would march to Domitius and fight a battle with the merged army. If Pompey besieged Caesar's allied towns in Greece, Caesar would march to Domitius and attack Scipio, forcing Pompey to react or lose an began his march at full pace from Apollonia. Pompey, however, had also come to a similar conclusion. If Scipio was caught unsupported, his legions would surely be lost. Both Caesar and Pompey were once again in a race with each other, each hoping to reach their ally before the other. Leaving Cato in control of Dyrrhachium, Pompey began his march to Scipio. As he did, he took measures to slow Caesar, spreading the word of his defeat, and as a result, Caesar found little support on his side, and his scouts and messengers found it impossible to reach Domitius. When both armies were just 4 hours from the positions of Domitius and Scipio, Caesar had a stroke of luck. Some of the Gauls who had defected to Pompey at Dyrrhachium had yet another change of heart, racing to Domitius and warning him of Pompey's approach and Caesar's location. Armed with this knowledge, Domitius was able to safely reposition and merge with Caesar. Caesar's whole army in the region, aside from the 27th, he had more local support and supplies, and so his intention was now to avoid another confrontation with Caesar. Despite his numbers, he was still aware of both how much more experienced enemy forces were compared to many of his own, and how dangerous Caesar was in the field. In Plutarch's words, Caesar had prisoners and killed as many in the field. Pompey was confident that, in time, Caesar would run out of supplies and that his army would break down. This was known as the Fabian strategy, and had been used to great effect by Fabius Maximus against Hannibal in the Second Punic War. Many high-ranking members of Pompey's army, however, were pushing for a decisive battle. Ahenobarbus, Scipio, Afranius, and Cicero applied pressure to Pompey, accusing the general variously of cowardice. Caesar, on the other, wasted no time. He marched quickly to Gomphi, an important town with many supplies, and home to the praetor of Thessaly, Androsthenes. Androsthenes had previously sent Thessaly's support for Caesar, but following Dyrrhachium, defected to Pompey, closing the gates of the city to Caesar, who stormed the town. The attack started at 3 in the afternoon and was all over by sunset. A number of nobles, likely including Androsthenes, committing suicide. Despite their defeat at Dyrrhachium, Caesar's veterans were still a force to be reckoned with. After resupplying, Caesar marched to Metropolis, which surrendered upon his army for the time being. Pompey knew that if he could keep Caesar pinned in Thessaly, he would still eventually run out of supplies and be starved out. But the pressure was continually mounting. Finally, Pompey relented to their demands and marched his army to Pharsalus to give battle, setting up his camp on the high ground. Morale amongst Pompey's men was high, and his officers were confident of victory. They had a huge numerical advantage and had already defeated Caesar once. Already talks were being had about who would be the consuls and praetors after the war, and who would get the property of Caesar and his allies, and who would hold Caesar's position of Pontifex Maximus. According to Caesar, they were not concerned with victory. Their 1,000 cavalry. Caesar's army, on the other hand, now numbered only around 21,000 infantry and 500 cavalry, according to his own account. Due to Caesar not counting his auxiliaries in this account, it is possible that the number of infantry and cavalry Caesar gives is underplayed, and Appian suggests. Caesar was equally confident, though. His army was not as numerous, through veterans, many having been recruited specifically for the war and only having seen their first action at Dyrrhachium. While the bulk of Pompey's infantry were Roman legions, They were supported by auxiliaries and allies from the east, making up the majority trained to fight in the Roman style, and the multitude of languages spoken in Pompey's army would have made coordination difficult. The men Caesar had under his command were from his 10 veteran legions, all of whom had fought with him since his Gallic campaigns, some for as many as 12 years. Every day, Caesar would commit, pulling his men out of camp but never moving from the high ground. It was clear that he was still not wholly committed to a pitched battle and did not want to give up his advantageous position, only being willing to commit to minor skirmishes. While these maneuvers were going on, Caesar also mounted some of his infantry, drilling them each day to bring his cavalry up to 2,000, still much less than Pompey's, but enough to at least stall them. It had been almost a month now since the Battle of Dyrrhachium, and Caesar eventually decided that if Pompey would not give battle, his best strategy would be to keep his army on the march, moving camp every day, forcing Pompey to shadow him and wearing out Pompey's less disciplined force. On the 9th of August 48 BC, Caesar was about to put this plan in action and had his army prepared to decamp, when Pompey's army suddenly moved off from their position on the hill to the plains to give battle. It is not entirely clear why Pompey chose to do this. The most likely answer is that he was pressured by his supporters who, upon seeing Caesar ready to move, were worried Caesar would slip away and had pressed Pompey to seize the opportunity and battle on now even terrain. Pompey knew that his key advantages were his cavalry and his numbers, and he drew up his army to best maximize their effectiveness. His infantry was formed into the classic Roman triplex eques, but slightly deeper than the usual 10-men depth order to better hold a defensive line. On his left wing, he stationed 2 legions under the command of Lucius Lentulus. These were 2 of Pompey's most experienced legions, one raised by himself, and the other having been raised by Caesar for the Gallic Wars, and later handed to Pompey just before the Civil War. In his center, he stationed Scipio and his Syrian legions, while the right would be held by 2 legions combined into one, with a river to their right protecting their flank. Within this twin legion were veterans from Cilicia and from Spain, likely survivors from the Battle of Ilerda. They were commanded by Ahenobarbus, one of Caesar's most active opponents. All these legions were Pompey's best legions, allies, and auxiliaries, would form the 2 back lines. On Pompey's extreme left were his 7,000 cavalry, under the command of Labienus, supported by Pompey's skirmishers and archers. A further 2,000 infantry were held in reserve in Pompey's camp, under the command of Afranius and Pompey's son Gnaeus. Pompey positioned himself on the left. His plan was to use the tactic of his hero, Alexander the Great, with Ahenobarbus and the river guarding his right flank. Pompey's infantry would hold the line, while the entire cavalry force would flank left, destroying Caesar's cavalry before falling on his legions from behind, becoming the hammer to the anvil of the defending legions. Caesar also drew his army up in the triplex eques formation. The 10th Legion, Caesar's personal favorite and some of his best, distinguished himself at Dyrrhachium, and this was also the 8th and 9th, with the river to their left, was to work as one legion under the command of Antony. The center would be held the 2nd and 3rd lines, the 3rd having strict orders to not engage until Caesar gave the signal. In order to match Pompey's line, Caesar had to stretch his own thin, only 6 outnumbered, and Caesar was well aware that they would not be able to stall Pompey's horse for long. As such, he also pulled 3,000 men from various legions, arming them with spears and forming them into a 4th line behind. Caesar was the one to begin the engagement, ordering his front 2 lines to march, as was standard military custom, but they instead stood fast, holding their line. In a brilliant display of discipline, Caesar's men spontaneously halted mid-charge and reassembled. After a brief pause, when nearer to Pompey's line. Javelins were and Pompey's men, braced and with interlocked shields, held the line. An intense melee ensued with brutal close-quarters fighting. Gallienus led the Pompeian cavalry to Caesar's right flank, supported by the skirmishers and archers, smashing into the being forced back before retreating entirely. They had, however, performed their role. Whilst Pompey's cavalry had been fighting with Caesar's, Caesar had given the order for his cavalry. The Pompeian cavalry had been preparing to charge Caesar's legions in the rear, but with Caesar's cavalry acting as a screen, they hadn't moved into position, and now they found themselves 3,000 heavily armored spearmen. Pompey's cavalry, though numerous, were not heavy cavalry, and many were young nobles with little experience of warfare, fighting veteran spear high ground to try and regroup, but the damage had already been done. As they pushed on, it was now Pompey who was being flanked. His left flank legions, both who had previously fought alongside Caesar and his legions, now found themselves attacked on multiple fronts by their old comrades, the 10th Legion from the front and the 4th Line from the left flank and rear. Every man he had into the battle. Under this huge pressure, Pompey's line began to break, starting with the 1st and 3rd. This was also where Pompey had stationed himself, and almost becoming surrounded, Pompey's line broke in quick succession, Caesar's 4th line rolling up the flank, while in their camp. Others simply fled the battlefield. Caesar, knowing his victory needed to be complete, stormed the camp, easily overwhelming the few thousand reserves and men who had retreated. Those that had retreated from the battlefield were soon surrounded on a hill and forced to surrender. Caesar had won. Pompey had already gone, fleeing with 30 bodyguards. Many other high-ranking Pompeians, such as Labienus, Afranius, Scipio, and Pompey's son Gnaeus, had also managed to escape. Nonetheless, not all had been so lucky. Ahenobarbus, brave but ill-starred, had been cut down in the retreat, possibly by Antony himself. Many others had been captured in Pompey's camp and in the immediate aftermath. Among these was a young man, Marcus Junius Brutus. The son of Caesar's mistress, Brutus was held in high regard by Caesar, who had given his men orders to not kill Brutus. When Brutus surrendered, Caesar was overjoyed, welcoming him with open arms. Caesar showed his customary leniency to Pompey's soldiers as well, with more than 24,000 surrendering to him. In total, Caesar claimed to have lost 200 men and 30 centurions in the battle, while giving the Pompeian losses as 15,000 dead and the 24,000 surrendered. These numbers seem suspiciously exaggerated, and Appian suggests it was more like surrendering or fleeing. Whichever is closer to the truth, the fact remains that Caesar's victory was decisive. Aside from having broken Pompey's largest army, he had scattered the Pompeian officers, many fleeing to not doubling in size. Pompey himself sailed first to the Greek islands of Lesbos and Mytilene, meeting his wife Cornelia and his youngest son Sextus. His intent was to get his family far away from Caesar and use his connections in the east to rebuild an army to resist Caesar. By the time he reached Cyprus, he had taken out private loans and put together a fleet along with 2,000 men. His defeat, however, had cost him much public support. Pompey had initially planned to head to the province of Syria, but they turned against him and he was forced to look elsewhere. He decided on Egypt. The boy pharaoh, Ptolemy XIII, owed his king his will that made Ptolemy pharaoh. Pompey had also lent a number of officers and soldiers from his eastern command to the pharaoh's army. Confident he would find support there, Pompey sailed to Egypt. He was met off the coast by a small rowing boat which would take Pompey to shore. Aboard were a man called Sabius, the head of the Egyptian army Achillas, and an ex-officer of Pompey's, Lucius Septimius. Pompey's wife was worried by the presence of Septimius. Stepping off Sophocles to his wife, he who enters a tyrant's door becomes his slave, even if he leaves a free man. As the small boat rowed to shore, Pompey tried to alleviate the tense atmosphere, telling struck, stabbing the old general, quickly followed by both Achillas and Savius. Septimius then beheaded his corpse, throwing the body naked into the sea. Ptolemy, upon the counsel of his advisors, had betrayed Pompey, times consul, conqueror of the East, most prolific generals, was dead. It is worth noting how revered Pompey was. Plutarch despaired that he and Caesar had gone to war. Had they been willing to enjoy the fruits of their labors in peace and tranquility, the greatest and best part of the world was their own. If they must have victories and triumphs, what Scythian horse, what Parthian arrows, what Indian treasures could have resisted 70,000 Romans led on by Pompey and Caesar? Though arguably past his prime at Pharsalus, Pompey had not at all fought badly. His plan was solid and the best that could be done. The reason for his defeat was not poor generalship, but the skill and experience of Caesar and his infantry, and the lack of experience of Pompey's cavalry. Pompey and Caesar were both incredibly talented generals, and it is telling how often the two decided and away. He was next presented the seal of Pompey, at which point Caesar broke down in tears. Though enemies in later life, it is worth remembering that Caesar and Pompey had been political allies for around 8 years, and had even been related by marriage. Caesar was well aware that, despite being his enemy, Pompey had been a titan of his turning point in the war. It was now the optimists who would find themselves on the back foot. Nevertheless, the war was far from over. Pompey's staunchest supporters, Cato, Scipio, and Pompey's son, distant. With them also was Labienus, now undoubtedly the best commander among the optimates. Our series on Caesar's civil war will continue, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access on Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one. It caused the decline of classical civilization, but one of the possible candidates is the end of the 2nd century AD, when the Emperor of Rome, Commodus, squandered 100 years of progress. But who was the son of Marcus Aurelius, and what cemented his reputation throughout the millennia and Nero? Welcome to our video on Commodus and the end of the Roman Golden Age. We're happy to present the sponsor of the Western Roman Empire. Yet among the small but illustrious order of truly notable Byzantine rulers, alongside such great figures as Justinian, Constantine, and Heraclius, stands possibly the greatest ruler of the medieval age, Basil II. Welcome to our video on the event that was governed under his reign, and how this emperor eventually came to be known by the moniker for which he would be famous forever after, Bulgaroctonos, the Bulgar Slayer. Thanks to Blood of Steel for sponsoring this video. Blood of Steel is a new massively multiplayer online action strategy game units to fight in massive battles, pitting thousands of fighters against each other. You'll fight as one of the generals in exciting action, but you'll also be able to command the unit under them, which brings a strategy element. Roster of heroes. Blood of Steel has hundreds of ancient and medieval leaders, among them Crusaders and Vikings, and 3 Kingdoms era generals, divided into 3 classes, including Caesar, Alexander, Richard Lionheart, Joan of Arc, Leonidas, Harold Hardrada, Hans Shin, Edward I, Lubu, and Baldwin IV. Conquer cities, expand your empire. In Blood of Steel, you'll not be alone. Join a legion war with your friends, siege a castle, or become kings of the hill. Let your guild be the most powerful league on the Steel Land. Blood of Steel prides itself on not being pay to win, as you can only buy skin. But the second was son of Emperor Romanos II, and his century-old dynasty, called Macedonian due to the birthplace of its family, lacked any real authority, although and then to a usurping magnate. While the reign of Romanos himself had been a prosperous one, but it seems to have been despite the emperor, as his father preferred luxury and excess to unexpectedly died when Basil was just 5, leaving the imperial dynasty in a precarious position. This dangerous situation was solved swiftly when Byzantium's greatest general, Nicephorus Phocas, assumed the role of co-emperor and married Theophano, swearing to protect and uphold the rights of Basil and his brother Constantine, becoming as known as the Pale Death of the Saracens, waged constant warfare, reconquering Cilicia, Cyprus, and Antioch. Caliphate disintegrated. However, the strain on Byzantium's population and Nicephorus' failure as a politician led to his murder and deposition by John Zimisces in 969. Just like his children. During his 8-year-long reign, he managed to subdue Bulgaria. 18-year-old Basil II, Basileus of an empire nearing the zenith of its medieval power. Due to the young ruler's inexperience, real governmental authority was exercised by courtier Basil Agapenos. This vizier-like character reshuffled military appointments throughout the empire following Zimisces' death, stirring up a hornet's nest. Skleros, a general from an influential family, was demoted, but unwilling to take such a slap in the face, Skleros proclaimed himself emperor in summer 976. This initiated forces, prompting Lakapenos to desperately recall one of Skleros' rivals, chief of perhaps the greatest of noble families, Vidas Phocas. Domesticos, he lured Skleros into northeast and defeated him in 979, after which the usurper fled to Baghdad. By 985, Basil desired political Lakapenos. Then, a year later, believing military accolades of his own would nullify Phocas' power, the emperor embarked on a campaign against the Bulgarian Empire, ruled by a member of the Trumpeter dynasty, Samuel, the first of his dynasty to. On his way home from the unsuccessful venture to Trajan's Gate, and he barely escaped alive. Once word of this catastrophe reverberated east, Skleros returned and revived his rebellion in 987. He was joined soon after by Phocas, who also claimed the throne for himself. As Basil had little power in Asia Minor at the time, Phocas died, but Basil II had one key advantage: he was thoroughly incompetent. In a now immortal duel, Basil II married off his sister Anna to Vladimir, Grand Prince of the newly Christianized Rus, in return for 6,000 of his ferocious Varangian mercenaries, who would be loyal only to the Byzantine emperor. Their impact on Basil's reign was felt immediately. With the exotic, lethal force of Northmen at his side, the emperor crossed the Hellespont and locked horns with one of Phocas' subordinates at Chrysopolis in late 988. The rebel army was destroyed, its leader captured and executed, and confronted the arch-traitor Bardas Phocas, paraded around the empire as a grisly threat, terrifying his remaining supporters into surrender and leaving Basil the undisputed master of the empire. In the immediate aftermath, Basil enacted policies designed to moderate the unruly aristocracy as a pro-peasant himself as the champion of the serfs. But it is more likely that the actual goal was to increase Basil's own power. Perhaps the strictest of these measures was the Allelengion, or mutual security tax, which required the empire's oligarchy to meet any financial shortfall for peasants who were too destitute to pay up themselves, and those who died in war. This brought Basil II great favor among the peasantry, but irritated the nobles. The emperor also refused to appoint another domestikos of the East, the high military posting which frequently served as a stepping stone to the throne. Other political tactics included increasing the authority of imperial bureaucrats, confiscating property. Local narratives generally focus on dramatic events, and so the notable scarcity of our sources for Basil's reign after the Skleros Phokos revolts indicate that his domestic program was working. According to the darkness that envelops Constantinople probably means famines, unpopular appointments, vexatious taxes, or abuse. When viewed like this, Basil II appears at first glance to be an early medieval equivalent of Antoninus Pius, a wise emperor whose policies mitigated the kind of chaos which chroniclers love to write about. The image of Basil as a pacifistic emperor is spoiled completely with account, comprising some of the most famous conflicts in all Byzantine history. Unfortunately for us, the information we possess on Basil's military activity following the Magnate revolts is very poor. A general theme we can nevertheless observe is a rebalancing of the empire's martial focus from the eastern frontier, where the great Byzantine generals of the to Bulgaria. Having learned his gate and during his civil wars, Basil took the field again in 991 against the twin Bulgarian rulers, Samuel and Roman, aiming to retake imperial lands which had been lost after the disasters of 986. This time, however, the Basileus focused on raising forces of quality rather than quantity. Only the best themed troops, an expanded Tagmata professional force, and of course the vaunted Varangians marched with him. For 4 consecutive years, Basil II methodically bulldozed his way around Macedonia and Thrace, capturing or destroying many Bulgarian citadels, defeating Samuel in battle, and even taking Tsar Roman prisoner. To make the campaign easier, Basil employed typically sharp Lycia and Croatia. Meanwhile, the situation on Byzantium's eastern frontier in Syria was deteriorating. Since hostilities with the Fatimid Caliphate resumed in 990, Dux of Antioch, Michael Borzi, had been repeatedly thrashed and the empire's satellite state of Aleppo besieged. After receiving an appeal from the latter whilst campaigning in Bulgaria, Basil departed with his main army and went east in early. The Basileus mounted his infantry on mules so that the entire army could travel more swiftly. Because of this, it took only a month to move from Bulgaria to Antioch. This goes a long way to show the type of commander Basil II was, a strategist, logistician, and micromanager, who, while not a flashy battlefield tactician, scoured the Byzantine military manuals and used that knowledge to bring home the victories. Not wasting a moment, Basil beelined straight for Aleppo and forced the Fatimid siege army into a panicked retreat. After then receiving the homage for giving the debts of his Muslim clients, the emperor captured Apamea and several other cities in the region. At one point, his forces were raided by local tribesmen, and Basil wasn't going to put up with it. He had the nomads' hands cut off and then released them. No more attacks are recorded. Choosing to remain in Syria until the area was stable, the emperor fought more battles against the Fatimids and enthused to support a revolt against Cairo in 997, but then pivoted insurrection a year later because it severed Fatimid. Basil II signed a decade-long peace with Cairo, integrated part of Georgia, and then turned his gaze back to the west. To ensure tranquility remained on the Fatimid border, the Basileus' trusted subordinate, Nikephoros Orenos, who had recently beaten Samuel's army in Basil's absence, was left there as Dux. Making his way up the Via Militaris, the emperor established his base of operations at Philippopolis before turning north, taking Sredets and a number of peripheral fortresses despite gritty resistance. With the Sofia Basin thereby secured, Samuel's domains were cut in two, leaving each segment more vulnerable. Then in 1001, Basil embarked on a campaign to recapture Byzantine possessions in Greece and Macedonia, capturing with Byzantine forces invading the Middle Danube in an attempt to confine Tsar Samuil, who had inherited the citrus of Vidin. As his countermove, the Bulgarian ruler circled around and sacked Adrianople as a distraction, hoping the emperor would withdraw to deal with him. Unwilling to be peeled away from his strategy, which ended in success during December 1002. With Vidin's fall, Bulgaria's heartland was virtually encircled by Roman bases. In 1003, after wintering in the captured city, the emperors Tagmata and Varangian warriors took Nisus before bearing down on Skopje. There they encountered Samuil's relief force opposite them over the Vardar River. The Tsar encamped on the south side, trusting in the watercourse's depth to protect his camp. Unfortunately for him, and descended on the Bulgarian camp, forcing Samuil into rout. It would be gratuitous to include every one of Basil's victories. His triumphs led to a military status quo summarized by our main source, John Skilitzes. Samuil could do nothing in open country, nor could he oppose the emperor in formal battle. He was shattered on all fronts, and his forces were declining. The weakening of Bulgarian forces could no longer go toe-to-toe with the clinical Byzantines. Nevertheless, Skilitzes tells us that the emperor continues to invade Bulgaria every year without interruption, laying waste to everything that came to hand. So it is inferred that Samuil either fought a guerrilla war of back-and-forth raids during the narratively dark years leading up to 1014. Conflict ramped up again in 1014 for reasons that are not entirely clear. In his acclaimed book on the wars between Byzantium and Bulgaria, Denis Hupchik hypothesizes that a peace agreement made in 1004 or 1005 simply expired, since Byzantine peace deals usually lasted for a decade as a matter of course. Alternatively, it may have been that, whatever the real cause may or may not have been, we do know that in 1014, Basil's main army, perhaps 23,000 strong, struck Bulgarian frontier positions. The emperor marched north along the Struma River until he reached the valley carved out by one of its westward leading tributaries. Basil pivoted and advanced into this low area between two large mountain ranges, which the Byzantines dubbed Kimbalonga, or Long Plain, until it narrowed midway through. At the valley's most enclosed point, known as Kulic, or more notoriously, Claydon, Little Key, the imperial forces discovered Samuil's revitalized Bulgarians blocking their path, heavily fortified. Basil II launched a series of frontal attacks against the Bulgarians, which Skilitzes describes. The Byzantine soldiers attempted to force a way in, but the guards stoutly resisted, killing the assailants and wounding them by hurling weapons from up above. Basil dispatched Xiphias to outflank the Bulgarians via a Belasit's imperial victory and many prisoners taken.
There it is, there's the combination. Look at the smirk. You're on. Look at that. This shot's starting to take. Oh, you know, he's going to. Oh, I'm so glad he didn't retire. He's always had a good chin now.
Great head.
There you go.
I'm
Don't do that with Sour. That's stupid. You don't do that with Sour, my friend.
No way.
Still laughing.
Oh my God.
Still laughing.
Is he crazy?
No, I'm good for TikTok.
I don't be bothered because he knows Andy can fight.
What, Alan?
Yeah, it's not great.
Jumping knee. Hard leg kick. Nice jumping knee from Sour. Still tough, still in there.
God,
There you go. There you go.
Oh
You
my
don't drop your hands with Andy Sour. You don't drop your hands with Andy Sour. You do not do that. And he's down like a fish. There you go.
Wow.
You don't drop your hands. Sorry for the screaming. I will breathe.
Sorry, yeah.
Nicely. Oh, come on, who cares? We're paid to scream. What a performance there by Sauer. You don't drop your hands with Sauer and laugh. Not many got venom in his fist. And that was a killer of a shot. Here we go then. Sauer just poured on the combinations as per usual. Then he dropped his hands and thought it was funny, and the right hand bounced off his head. He was absolutely done. He was sounding like a fish on the front of the right hand. Bang, bang, bang. Down you go. And it reminded me of a fish out of water. There you go. Boom, boom, bang. See ya. Oh, what a heart of a lion. Oh my goodness. Was this the best Infusion Live we've ever had? You can't skip me. That was absolutely super. There you go. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for all your support. We'll see you very soon on Infusion Live.
Wow!
You don't drop your hands without me.
I might be bothered because he knows Andy can fight. What?
This video is brought to you by on the same mission dealt with. Lucy was started by two Caltechs on future where nicotine product looking for without tobacco. Product does contain nicotine and nicotine. To assassinate Hitler, collapse. For decades, historians and medical professionals have proposed a variety of candidates for Hitler's particular ailments, from Parkinson's to tertiary neurogassing. The Third Reich is fanatically driven by was always a mess of contradictions. Though Nazi ideology lionized the blonde, blue-eyed Aryan, a few top Nazis, including Heinrich Himmler, Martin Bormann, Hermann Goering, Joseph Goebbels, and Hitler himself, remotely resembled this ideal. Even the infamous SS, the organization most obsessed with racial purity, eventually recruited entire legions of Muslims from the Balkans and Hindus and Sheiks from India into its ranks. But perhaps the most surprising contradiction of all was that Hitler's personal doctor, Theodor Morell, the man with arguably the greatest and most intimate access to the Führer, was half Jewish. Born in 1886, the balding, overweight Morell served as a ship's doctor and army physician during World War I before establishing a general practice on Berlin's fashionable Kurfürstendamm Street. There he amassed a clientele of mainly wealthy, high society patients whose mostly non-existent ailments responded well to flattery, homeopathy, and a variety of elaborate quack cures Morel concocted himself. Hitler met Morel by chance at a Christmas party. Repulsive body odor and unpleasant demeanor, Hitler took an instant health complaints. Hitler had suffered from digestive issues his entire life, alternating between crippling bouts of stomach cramps, diarrhea, constipation, and uncontrollable flab image, and expected to attend countless such functions and deliver speeches in public. It was a serious problem. These issues prompted Hitler to become a vegetarian in the early 1930s, eliminating meat, milk, butter, and other rich foods from his diet in favor of vegetables and whole grains. But while this diet likely reduced the odor of Hitler's flatulence, the increased fiber intake only made the problem worse, eventually leading Hitler, who did not trust doctors, to seek out Dr. Morel's assistance. At first, Morel prescribed the Führer a medication called Butaflor, a precursor to modern probiotics. Said to be made from the excrement of Bulgarian peasants of the most vigorous stock, the pills claim to replace the to exclaim, "Nobody has ever before told me logical that I have the greatest confidence follow his prescription to the letter." It is more than likely, however, that this improvement was merely the product of the placebo effect, for Hitler's bouts of intestinal distress tended to coincide with periods of high stress. Nonetheless, Morel had gained Hitler's confidence and became a valued member of his inner circle. But while Morel's medical interventions were initially limited to diet tips and gut pills, he soon began prescribing the Führer a dizzying array of enzymes, animal extracts, hormones, painkillers, sedatives, and stimulants, along with secret injections of his own concoction, which he vaguely described as containing vitamins. By 1941, Hitler was taking 63 different pills containing 92 different drugs at a rate of 150 pills a week. While Hitler's inner circle grew increasingly suspicious of Morel's quackery, Hitler continued to swear by him, the doctor traveling with the Führer everywhere he went, even as far as the Wolf's Lair, his forward headquarters in East Prussia. Meanwhile, Morel's high position in the Nazi establishment allowed him to acquire pharmaceutical companies and conquered territories to mass produce his various health tonics, netting in millions. Yet Morel's intense drug regimen did little to improve Hitler's overall health, and as the Führer continued to suffer from bouts of intestinal distress, irritability, insomnia, and fatigue, Morel was forced to alternate between medications such as morphine and laxatives, or stimulants and sedatives to keep his symptoms on an even keel. Among the first to suspect that Morel's drug cocktails, if not directly responsible, at least making them worse, was Dr. Erwin Giesing, who and the contents of the doctor's favorite anti-gas pills. What he discovered shocked him. The active ingredients on the tin included strychnine, commonly used in rat poison, and atropine, another toxin used as a heart medication. While Morel had only prescribed 2 pills per meal, Hitler ate them like gut pills. When in its contents, Hitler was unfazed, explaining, "I myself always thought they were just charcoal tablets for soaking up my intestinal gases, and I always felt rather pleasant after taking them." And despite Dr. Giesing's dire warnings about the other drugs Morel was prescribing him, Hitler refused to listen, dismissing Giesing for daring to contradict his favorite physician. In any case, an analysis of the pills revealed levels of strychnine and atropine too low to have any serious effect. So while the pills might not have been helping Hitler, they probably weren't hurting him either. Morel's daily vitamin injections, however, were a different matter entirely. By 1941, Hitler was receiving an injection in bed every morning as part of his daily routine. While Morel always maintains that his cocktails contained nothing but glucose and vitamins, Hitler's reaction to them tells a very different story. Within minutes, the injections would transform the Führer from exhausted and groggy to alert, euphoric, and chatty, a state that lasted for several hours afterward. The effect is consistent not with glucose, but rather with amphetamines. Amphetamine use was common in Nazi Germany, with German troops being issued a type of oral methamphetamine called Pervitin to increase alertness and stamina and reduce combat fatigue. It is believed that Pervitin was a key factor in allowing German forces to steamroller across France in only 6 weeks in the summer of 1940. However, it is now known that amphetamines are highly addictive, and as the war ground on and Germany's situation deteriorated, Hitler required larger and more frequent doses to overcome his body's tolerance to the drug. By 1944, Hitler was receiving 2 injections a day of 16 cc each, a 700-fold increase from when he first started. And with this increasing dependence came the classic symptoms of amphetamine abuse: insomnia, loss of appetite, euphoria, irritability, paranoia, impulsiveness, and wild mood swings, which severely affected his ability to make rational decisions in a time of crisis. In the final months of the war, this rigid, stubborn thinking led Hitler to issue endless, futile, no-retreat orders that resulted in hundreds of thousands of German troops being needlessly killed or captured. At the Battle of Stalingrad, 6,000 perished. Heavy amphetamine use also took a toll on Hitler's body, with historians attributing his tremors and extreme weakness in his final days to a series of strokes or heart attacks, and extremely unlikely occurrence for a healthy 56-year-old. Given his terrible physical at the very end, spending the last days of the war holed up in the Führer bunker along with the rest of the Nazi high command. But on April the 21st, 1945, Morrill approached the Führer with one of his daily insisting on remaining in his capital city and committing suicide before the Russians took over. Consequently, he grew paranoid that his subordinates, especially Morrill, would conspire to drag him and spirit him away. The dismissal came as a relief to Morrill, who boarded an evacuation flight along with other Nazi officials and successfully managed to flee the city. He was captured by American forces in July, but after it was determined that he had committed no war crimes, he was released. Hitler's eccentric, incompetent personal doctor lived on for another 3 years, finally dying of a stroke in May 1948. Wars and battles are never lost or won by a single factor, but seemingly small factors can have outsized effects. While it's likely Nazi Germany's plans of European conquest were doomed from the start, the effects of Dr. Theodor Morrill's injections on the Führer's mental and physical health led to a chain of increasingly poor decisions that ultimately hastened its demise. And all because Adolf Hitler farted like a horse. And now for a bonus fact. While the Nazis caffeine, strange as it may seem, the Third Reich was one of the first large-scale adopters of the relatively new invention of decaffeinated coffee, whose consumption was promoted as official government policy. Nazi doctrine called for citizens to adopt a healthy, natural lifestyle in order to produce a stronger, more virile Aryan race, encouraging them to exercise regularly and avoid alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine. And decaf coffee was the ideal tool with which to promote these ideals. The first decaffeination process was developed 30 years earlier by Ludwig Roselius, who discovered that a shipment of coffee beans, which was at his own company, Kaffee Haag, which sold decaffeinated coffee under the brand name Sanka, short of the popularity, truly took off, the product being promoted in official propaganda and served in large quantities at Nazi rallies, festivals, and reduced smoking and alcohol consumption were unsuccessful, and it is likely that Sanka's popularity was due more to its status as a luxury product than its supposed health benefits. A far more toxic substance than caffeine is, even in small quantities. Whatever the reasons for its popularity, after the war, Sanka and other brands of decaf coffee became worldwide bestsellers, taking their place alongside Fanta as an unexpectedly long-lived culinary legacy of the Third Reich. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.
At a critical turning point in the Second World War, 80,000 Marines prepare for a daring assault on a strategic Japanese island.
We didn't know how dangerous it was. Never had a clue. It's like walking into a shooting gallery.
Confronted by overwhelming resistance, they risk everything to defeat a tyrannical enemy.
It was just unbelievable.
Many of the Marines are boys, no older than 20.
Today we talk about the last woman to be imprisoned in Britain for witchcraft, which is maybe a little closer to your lifetime than you might have expected. But first, something you'll never ever want to set on fire. That's a transition, and this video is brought to you by Mack Weldon. Mack Weldon is a premium lens.